Hello horror junkies, welcome to my channel. My name is Courtney and this is Courtney After Dark. Today I am talking about a little known movie called Baghead, and I discovered this movie last year and I had just recently rewatched it and remembered how actually good it is. I actually really enjoyed this movie. The movie starts with an old man going to answer someone banging on the door. The visitor is a young man who claims he wants to see her. The old man sends him home and then begins recording a video. In the video he says, "This place comes with a tenant who is tied to the property and now you're the guardian." But who he is speaking to, we don't yet know. She cannot be let out of the basement, and if you're watching, then I have failed. Then he proceeds to pour gas all over the entire place, but when he lights it, it backfires and it burns him to death. And there you have it, that's the beginning of the movie. Now we switch to this character, Iris, who is breaking into an apartment she was evicted from. Then she's walking with her friend with just like a trash bag full of clothes and what few belongings she has, and she gets a call saying that her estranged father is dead. So she takes a flight over to wherever he was to see his burned body and then head over to the place she has now inherited, which is one of those really old taverns with an apartment upstairs. It's actually pretty awesome, aside from the fact that it comes with a demon. She takes a look around, sees the burns on the floor where her dad burned to death, and behind it there is a creepy door covered in strange symbols. So Iris is crashing there for the night and she hears a timer go off in the middle of the night and goes to investigate and eventually wanders to that creepy door down the hallway, but gets a little distracted when that young man from earlier in the movie just appears inside the house like a freaking creep and startles the crap out of her. I mean, yes, obviously, you're breaking and entering, sir. And then he asks if she's the new owner and starts spouting the same stuff about wanting to see her. And he says he can give her money. Obviously, Iris is confused, especially when the man says, "I want to see the woman in the basement," or his wife. And Iris insists that she is the only one there. And creepily, he just says he isn't crazy. Other people come there for the same reason. Eventually, Iris, who's extremely broke, takes the money and says, "Come back tomorrow." She can't find the key to the basement yet, and she'll have it by the time he comes back. To which the man walks out very happy. He's a very happy man because now she's agreed to let him see this creepy thing in the basement. The next day, Iris visits the solicitor handling the estate and eventually signs the papers for the apartment, and strangely, he's wearing a ring that has the exact same symbols on it that the basement door does. And this contract just looks too old and like creepy for me to ever sign. It could never be me. I would never sign that piece of paper, never in my life. It looks like something, you know, you're signing your soul away. That's what that looks like. And this man, he looks a little bit too eager to get Iris to sign the papers too. And before she leaves, he sends her with instructions, whatever that means. That night, her very loyal friend shows up because she's been worried about her. And Iris explains that this random dude gave her tons of money, and I mean like thousands of dollars, to go into the basement. And naturally, her friend is very skeptical about this. But Iris is convinced that people just came there to get a scare and just really wants the money, so she agreed. So this guy, Neil, shows up and all three of these people go into the basement where a big hole in the wall seems to lead just into darkness. And he just says, "Come out." The girls still think it's a joke until a very creepy figure with a sack over its head comes creeping out of this deep dark hole. Neil says to it, "My wife died last year. I need to speak with her." The entity starts heading straight for Iris, and when she tells her to stay back, the entity obeys. And Neil seems very excited about that, and he tells her to tell it to sit in the chair, which it does. So now Neil repeats that he wants to talk to his wife. The entity holds out his hand and Neil places what looks like a wedding ring into the creature's hand, which the entity then eats. Neil then straps the entity into the chair and the entity starts to convulse. When Neil removes the bag on her head, he's appalled to see that the entity is not who he thought it was. Because, you know, he was trying to talk to his wife, and this older woman is clearly not his wife. He says this is all wrong. He wants to speak to his wife, and this is when we find out that the woman in the chair is his dead mother, who he had a little beef with, so even though he didn't want to talk to her, he finds himself kind of getting things off his chest anyways. And this is when Baghead starts taunting him until he gets up and moves away, and suddenly the chair is empty. Baghead somehow gets free and attacks Neil, and Iris quickly puts the bag back on her head, which sort of like pacifies her, and she ends up spitting the ring back up. Iris orders her back into her little hole, and that's that. So it would appear that signing this really creepy contract for this house gave her a little bit more than she bargained for. Neil then says that the ring was actually his mother's before he gave it to his wife, and that's why it was all messed up. Katie and Iris are thoroughly freaked out, but Neil is super motivated to do it again and get it right next time. This is when Iris finds the tape her father recorded, and she and Katie watch it, and it's not super encouraging. He tells her all about the woman in the basement and says she is tied to the title and the deed. So now Iris technically owns her. This Baghead, this entity, has the power to bring back the dead, but you can only talk to them for 2 minutes. It's a very strict rule. He says never to use her and never to cross that threshold through the hole in the wall, because her sole purpose is to be free and she will manipulate you into making that happen. In this video, he also talks about his family and the fact that he actually cared about his family, but was pretty much cursed with this thing in the basement. Katie rightfully wants to leave, but Iris has nowhere to go, and Neil is willing to pay lots of money to see Baghead, so she wants to stay for a few days and make that money so she can have an actual life. And she gets Katie to agree to stay for just a few days. Iris then heads over to see Neil, and while she's doing that, Katie is at the pub. The movie kind of focuses on these photos, like these really, really old photos of men more than once. But while she's alone, one of these photos of like a man from like the 1800s or 1900s falls off the wall. And she kind of fishes the photo out of the broken glass and then Googles the name written on the back of it. That man suddenly appears like at the bar, obviously freaking her out. But in the tape that the dead dad made, he did say that the entity or Baghead can send ghosts out of the basement. So now we know that the place is super haunted. Iris is off having tea with Neil, who puts the idea in her head that she could talk to her dad through the entity and, get some things off her chest. And then they head back to the pub and Neil starts his session with Baghead, but this time the right dead person comes through. When he contacts his wife, she's incredibly freaked out, wondering what's going on, why is she strapped to a chair, and she does seem to remember the last moments before her death, but again she's really freaked out and doesn't know where she is. Neil tells her she crashed her car and she died, but then Neil steps back and asks her, who were you seeing? So clearly his motives for talking to his dead wife are not just to say goodbye and get some closure, it's to confront her about who she was cheating on him with, or who he thinks that she was cheating on him with. Now the 2 minutes are up, the timer goes off, the entity then is free to just come through and say whatever it wants, and Iris tries to put the bag back on her head, but things start getting really weird. She hears a car crash, and there's flashing lights, and suddenly the entity is crouched in a corner and attacks Iris. Iris says, "I'm the guardian, you have to listen to me." And the entity, just as she's wandering back into her hole, says, "You don't understand, we're both prisoners." And it's worth a mention also that there is, when Iris found out that she owned this entity and the entity had to do whatever she wanted, she did actually write on the very first step of the basement stairway, "Do not cross." And she ordered the entity to not cross that. So it's like one of her little attempts to keep the entity in the basement. That will come up later. Iris then confronts Neil about the real intentions in talking to his wife, but it's clear that Neil is getting a little obsessive, like talking to Baghead is becoming sort of a drug, and he just needs another fix to get it right. That night, when she's alone, Iris has a vision of her father using Baghead to talk to who we assume is his dead wife, aka her mother. The timer runs out and Baghead remains his wife and starts trying to convince him to set her free and end it. But that's when her father starts pouring gas and alcohol over the entire basement. So we're getting a glimpse of his last moments, basically. The entity taunts him, saying he abandoned their daughter, and when he sets the place on fire, the only thing that catches is him. Later, Iris wakes up to see that Katie isn't in bed, and she wanders down into the basement looking for her, only to see her father. He says she was never up for being the guardian, and that she, aka Baghead, can sense her fear. Then he starts ripping chunks of his face off, and underneath is Baghead, and Iris gets mad and starts choking her, but then she starts feeling choked herself, so she rips the bag off of Baghead's head, and it's her face looking back. When she wakes, she's being choked to death by the necklace that earlier, I didn't say this, but earlier she did put the key to the basement on a necklace that she had around her neck. And now this necklace is choking her. This is when Katie is really being the wiser and tells Iris that it's all the entity just getting in her head, which obviously. But then this prompts Iris to snap at Katie and say, you're only saying these things because you don't like to see me succeeding. You're always the friend that's helping me and you just can't stand the fact that I don't need your help anymore. Things like that. She only likes her when she needs to be taken care of. So Katie walks out. Clearly, I would too. But she still has the photo of that man that she took from the frame, and so she's on a mission. She heads over to a very old house and breaks in to find photos, sketches, and papers all nailed to the wall, and she just starts collecting them all and putting them in a box. Meanwhile, Iris decides to pay Baghead a visit on her own, even though her father explicitly said to not use her. And who is under the bag? Her dad. She tries to get information out of him, but he says he never wanted her involved, which is why he never spoke to her in those years after they had separated, and she wasn't supposed to be there because he never left a will. He also says he actually has no idea what Baghead actually is, and reiterates that she should never use Baghead, which is exactly what she's doing in order to talk to her dad. And then the 2 minutes are up, and once more Baghead starts taunting Iris. But as her father's body catches fire, her dad comes through one more time and asks her for forgiveness and says never to bring him back. Katie then gives Iris a call as she's heading back to the pub, claiming she has information that might help them, but she is sent right to voicemail. Iris is getting tipsy at the bar because she just had an ordeal with her estranged father and decides to burn the deed that she signed. But the deed itself seems immune to fire and does not burn. I could have told you that. It looks exactly like a deed that would not burn. Like, this thing was cursed from the beginning. Katie returns to the pub with a box of old papers and starts looking around for Iris. She ends up wandering into the basement, and the entity is down there, and when it removes the bag, it is the man from the photo that Katie has been researching. And he spills the beans, or at least as many beans as he can. According to him, 400 years ago, an ancient brotherhood found a woman who could conjure the dead. They tried to abuse her power, but when she didn't cooperate, they burned her as a witch. But all that did was create a vengeful spirit. To stop her, they performed a ritual to imprison her. Centuries later, the descendants of the brotherhood reawakened her to try and use her powers again, but ultimately they all just started dying. And then the entity attacks Katie. Iris is upstairs, passed out, when she gets a message on her phone from Katie saying, help her. She wanders into the basement and hears her disembodied voice coming from the hole in the wall, and does yet another thing that her father told her not to do, and that is go into the hole in the wall. And she does find Katie, and they start wandering back to the entrance to this hole, but they're starting to get a little bit lost now. And during this little venture, she does see a little altar with a bowl and some pots and trinkets set in a random part of this like cave system, which seems insignificant at the moment, but just wait. Then Iris turns a corner and finds Katie's body lying on the ground. Realizing that Katie is actually dead, Iris is super pissed, but the entity is after her, so she makes a run for it and eventually gets out, and Neil is magically there in her house again to help her get out of the basement and past that little sign on the steps that says do not cross. He gives her some pills and water to calm her down, which never just take random pills. Just saying. Iris then says her father failed, and she'd just done the same thing by getting her friend killed, so this whole thing is going to end with her. Sounds very much like her dad. But as she's prepping for her little ghost rebellion, she's feeling very lightheaded. Weird. Neil helps her to bed and then goes off to do Neil things, which are always sketchy. When Iris wakes up, she heads to the basement and can hear Neil talking to the entity and saying shit like, I'll be different. Iris never wanted this place. I'll keep you safe. He also presents the deed where he signed his own name, but his name magically disappears when he presents it to the entity. And then Baghead turns into his wife and says she remembers that night now. She was in a rage and he gave her something to calm down. She asks, what did he give her? And he just says, it was something to calm you down. How was I supposed to know that you were going to run for the car? And she tells him, I was going to leave you because you scared me. Also, I was pregnant and I was scared for both of us. So now Neil suddenly realizes that whatever he gave his wife and that caused her to get into a car accident, she was also pregnant. So he killed not only her, but their unborn child. But this is where Baghead comes out and starts doing Baghead stuff and telling him to kill the owner of the deed. And that is when he realizes the owner of the deed is standing on the stairs listening to this entire conversation. So he chases her down. They continue this chase all the way to the rooftop of this building. As Iris is climbing climbing down the fire escape, he grabs her, like very Scar from Lion King style. He grabs her and she's kind of like dangling off of the edge of this building. And he just looks at her and he goes, what a good opportunity. And then he just lets her go. He then brings Baghead Iris's body and Iris's phone and gives the phone over to Baghead so he can speak to her. When Iris comes through, he tries to force her to transfer the deed to him. But Baghead instantly comes back through and says the guardian is dead, but her name is still on the deed, and now Iris is Baghead. Free of her leash, she turns to his mom, to his wife, to Iris, and just starts beating the crap out of him. And then we get a vision of the entity at her altar, like a flashback vision of the entity at her altar, manipulating this whole thing. She was doing little spells in her little cave this entire time to bring Neil to the house, to start a chain of events from her father's death to her getting the pub and Neil killing her. Everything. So Baghead kills Neil, burns the deed, and walks her ass out of that dang basement, burning the whole pub down as she leaves in the form of Iris herself. Honestly, can't blame the entity. You know, she was wronged from the very beginning. It just kind of got her revenge. You know, I don't think Iris or Katie deserved what happened, but, you know, there were a lot of crappy people who were trying to exploit her throughout her life and her unlife, her death. So I was like, but I do feel bad for Iris. Iris didn't deserve that. So that was the movie. I actually really enjoyed it. It was a little gem. I'd never heard of it before. I was just surfing through, like, you know, trying to find something to watch. And I was like, hey, it's the girl from The Witcher. And it's also the girl from Bridgerton. If you want to watch it, I definitely recommend it. If not, I just laid out the entire plot for you. If you enjoyed this video, please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you're not subscribed. I'm trying to get this channel off the ground. And until next time, I hope you guys have a spooky week. I will see you all in the next video. Bye!